Fleets really are the lifeblood of your game in Sins of a Solar Empire 2. Whether you succeed or fail is almost entirely decided by how well you build and manage your fleets. So today, let's take a look at the best way to build your fleets, the best items to choose, and how to effectively micromanage them in combat. Fleet building in Sins of a Solar Empire 2 is generally something that's done over the course of the entire game rather than all at once. It evolves over time as you unlock new ship types, and to be totally honest, there's no one right way to do it. That said, there are a few tips and general guidelines you can follow to ensure you have the best possible chances no matter what you come up against. To start off the game and any fleet, I'd always recommend going with a colonization capital ship. No matter what faction you're playing as, these will be an essential pick no matter what you're doing. Sure, they may not be the best in combat when compared to the other capital ships. However, that colonization ability allows them to fight whatever they find when they land in a gravity well and immediately colonize, so your fleet can move on rather than waiting for a separate ship to come in afterwards. Early on, this means rapid expansion, and in later wars against other empires, it means you can rapidly take their territory for yourself and begin fortification so you can snowball your way to victory. Alongside the convenience factor of colonization ships, they can also upgrade the colonize skill, improving the planet right out the gate with extra income or building slots. Regular colony ships can never do this, so it offers a huge advantage and means you can get planets working for you immediately rather than having to spend resources to get them started. In the early game, alongside your capital ship, you'll just want to max out your fleet supply with whatever you can get your hands on, and at that stage of the game, we're probably talking some super basic frigates. Every faction has one of these ships, and while they are fine against most things, they have no specialization. This makes them a bit of a jack of all trades but master of none, and in the later game, this tends to make them a little bit useless. The end goal of a fleet is to have ships that can take on each type of enemy you're likely to come across, so you can give them all targets to systematically dismantle whatever you're fighting. Once you've got a few resources under your belt and can start researching new units, you can start being a little bit more methodical when building up your fleets. Most of the time, it's wise to unlock ships one at a time and add a few of them to your fleets, rather than unlocking them all at once and only being able to afford the upgrades and no more ships. So for example, corvettes are normally an early unit unlock for most factions, so queue up their research and add around 10 to your fleet. You don't want to go crazy with any one unit type, as you then have a fleet that's easily counterable, so smaller amounts are the way to go, especially early on when resources are limited. After this, you'll likely have some more frigates that are strong versus other kinds of ships, so repeat the process slowly over time. Exactly how many you want to get of each entirely depends on what the fleet will be going up against. For example, as the tech, the flak frigate is a good pick to have quite a few of when you're taking on other players, as they're a good, cheap option for taking out strike craft and missiles. The Gauss frigate, however, is much better suited to taking on large ships like capital ships and cruisers. So you only need a few of them during early game battles with players, since they'll likely only have a single capital ship that they'll get good value firing on. If you're instead focusing on exploration and only need to take down defending forces, then bringing a bunch of gunship corvettes is a great idea, since you'll be primarily fighting smaller ships, which they can take down in moments. If you know exactly what you'll be fighting against, then obviously this is a lot easier, but even without intel, you just need to get a sense of what other empires use at different stages of the game. If you're playing about on par with everyone else, try to plan to fight against whatever you can currently recruit, and you'll probably do okay unless someone is much further ahead for whatever reason. If you rinse and repeat this process right up until the end of the game, you should end up with a pretty strong fleet. However, if you want a template for an endgame fleet, I'll pop some examples on the screen now whilst I explain what method I'm using to build them. As I said earlier, we're aiming for our fleet to be able to take on any enemy type it goes up against, and choosing quantities based on the most likely numbers of those threats in each force. In the endgame, whilst there are a lot of capital ships and even titans floating around, there'll still be threats of all shapes and sizes, so you have to be ready for anything and make use of every ship at your disposal to come out on top. You also want to make sure that you're using the best ship for each job. Yes, the gunship corvette is strong versus low durability targets, but so is the Harker heavy cruiser and strike craft. The Gauss frigate is strong versus larger ships, but it's nothing compared to the long-range missile cruiser or the Ogrov torpedo launcher. You want to phase out ships once they're outclassed to make sure you have the best possible unit for each and every role. Does this mean bigger is better? Not always. Some factions have corvettes which I'd recommend keeping to the endgame, like the Advent and their ability to siphon antimatter to empower capital ships. Nothing does that job, so they're always worth bringing to fill that niche. Beyond just this, it always helps to have some fast ships in your fleet, no matter what size they are, as the last thing you want is the enemy capital ships or titans getting away because all of your ships are too slow to catch up. Siege ships are another type that are a little bit in their own world. In most factions, they are the only ship that's dedicated to taking out planets. However, they're extremely limited and can normally only attack planets and nothing else. In my opinion, it totally comes down to personal preference, whether you want to take them. If you do bring them, as soon as your fleet enters a hostile planet, they'll get to work chipping away at its health, allowing you to capture it much faster. Going this route, you'll likely have to replace them fairly regularly, as enemies will target them to save the planet, and unless your fleet sits on top of them, they have no real defenses. Alternatively, if you don't bring them, you'll have no planetary damage until your capital ships are done fighting any orbital threats. This does mean you'll be a lot slower at taking down planets, but you don't have to deal with the hassle of replacing them after every single battle, so the time difference about evens out, depending on how long a trip it is to your factories. You can go the secret third option, where you do build them but have them in their own separate fleet with a small escort, and you bring them in once most of the orbital defenses have been taken out, and they'll hasten the taking of the planet. This is the most efficient option, but it does consume a good chunk of fleet supply to essentially attack in 2 waves. My recommendation would be the second option, as it's the simplest to use and you're not really missing out on much from the other two, so they're not really worth the added hassle. Capital ships are again their own separate debate. Each faction has a selection and each one is strong at a particular job, but you really need to bring one of each. Probably not unless you just want to see all their cool abilities, which is totally valid. The colonization capital ships are always worth bringing, as I mentioned earlier, but beyond that, it's a bit more vague. The carriers are normally a good option as they can bring a large number of strike craft, taking on the role of multiple carrier cruisers, whilst also having some decent abilities to maintain their squads. The battleships can be strong, but are normally much better earlier on when they're taking on swarms of lesser ships, as their power does tend to take a bit of a nosedive. They can have some strong abilities, but generally, they're a bit of an all-rounder rather than a specialist, and as we covered earlier, that's not what we're looking for. The siege ships are normally a safe bet, as they usually come with some strong planetary assault power alongside heavy weaponry, making them great versus other large ships, which you'll find plenty of in the endgame. Then each faction has a bit of a wildcard that's normally quite utility focused. Honestly, this varies so much from faction to faction that I don't really want to comment, but I found they're interesting but don't hold up in the endgame battles, so you can probably live without if you're really struggling for fleet supply. It goes without saying, by the way, that if you can get a Titan, do it. They're obscenely powerful and can take on entire fleets by themselves, so a no-brainer. Just throw them into any fleet or have them in a fleet of their own, roaming the map, laying waste to everything they find in their way. Moving over to outfitting for your ships, but first off, how's about some outfitting for yourself? Not my best transition. Check out Damn Good Apparel for all your skeleton-based merchandise needs. We've got shirts, hoodies, and hats, all with sweet skelly-based designs, perfect for the upcoming spooky season. Grab yourself something nice at the link below and use code UNDEAD for 5% off until the end of October. Back to the other kinds of outfitting with ship items. One thing to bear in mind whilst we're talking about ship items is that you should always build them while your ships are in a system that has an orbital structure capable of retrofitting. Sometimes this is a factory, other times it's its own structure, but either way, get your ships parked next to it. If you don't, ship items will take literally 10 times longer to complete. Building a full set of these can take forever at this rate, so do yourself a favor and build them fast and have much improved ships right out the gate. In my opinion, there are a few items and must picks, and after that, it really does come more down to preference. Every faction will have some version of the antimatter engine. This item will increase the max antimatter of the ship and allow them to use an ability to restore it during battles. It has unlimited uses, with the only downside being the 4-minute timer, but in this game that basically translates to a couple of times per battle, so it's not too bad at all. This is an essential item since abilities are one of the strongest parts about most capital ships and titans, so being able to use more of them before needing to recharge can't be a bad thing. Early on, most items you'll be able to use will have limited uses. The radiation bombs, for example, deal some great area damage and can come in useful when you're taking on your first enemy fleets, but with only 2 uses, you have one big battle and it's gone. Now admittedly the price does reflect this, but they still need a lot more micromanagement to use well and will need replacing on the regular, which can slow you down quite a lot if you don't have retrofitting capabilities on every single planet. Later you'll unlock other items which have unlimited uses and or passive effects, and these are much more enticing. As with most things in the game, I would advise making your ships better at what they're already good at. For example, the Call battleship from the tech has strong physical weapons, so the rapid autoloader would be a great item. Much improved reload speed means high damage outputs, it has passive effects and an active, so will always get you value, and it has unlimited uses, so you can leave it on autocast and basically never worry about it again. Some items also provide bonuses to nearby allied ships, making them great for spreading throughout your capital ships to elevate your entire fleet and massively increase its power. There are more specialized items like the Flak Burst, which is basically a big burst of damage to nearby enemy strike craft and missiles. This can be a good pick if you're finding yourself struggling versus specific units, but I wouldn't advise building them every single time as they may not always come useful. In general, I grab antimatter, something for tankiness whether it's shield, armor or hull depending on the ship's health breakdown, then a couple of items for their specific damage type. Occasionally there can be some strong utility items or one-offs depending on the faction, but in general, this is my preferred setup. Titans and star bases can also equip items, but theirs work a little bit differently. Titans are the closest to normal capital ships. In fact, they can make use of almost all the same items that they can, however, they also have a number of their own choices unique to them. These normally unlock more weapons, defenses, hangar slots, and even entirely new abilities, and most of the time are essential pickups. Uniqueness aside, they make your Titans into the most powerful versions of themselves. Would you rather have a Titan with half of its potential weaponry or the full arsenal? It's a no-brainer, so I normally queue these up as soon as the Titan spawns to get it to max power as soon as possible. They won't take up all their 8 slots, so you can still pick a few generic items, and the same advice as before applies here too. Star bases have their own unique sets of items, and most of them require some form of research to be built. Similar to the Titans, these can include new weaponry, defenses, hangar bays, and more, but in general, they make them better at defending and supporting the system they're in. In general, I just go with all of their weaponry and defense upgrades to make them into the ultimate orbital defense station, since that's the entire reason I'm building them. But if you want to allow them to build ships, spread influence, or take part in your faction's mechanic, then that is also a totally fair point, if you only have limited orbital slots to make use of. Now you've built your fleet, it's time to actually use it. In my beginner's guide, I said when starting out you can just send your fleets in and let them get to work, and whilst I stand by that advice for brand new players, once you've got a little bit more comfortable, you can start exercising a little bit more control. This will not only help you win battles faster, but also keep your fleet a lot healthier so you don't spend as much time and resources reinforcing. Once your fleet arrives at a battle, pause the game. If you're a multiplayer, obviously, this won't work, but the same steps apply. They'll just be a little bit harder to execute. We're going to select each ship type one by one and give them individual orders. To do this, simply zoom out so you can see the entire system, hold Control, and click on any ship. This selects all ships of that type on screen. Then you're going to find a target that they will work best against. So if you have missile ships, maybe some orbital defenses or cruisers, then hold Control again and right click on any of that target type in the same gravity well. This will cause all ships selected to attack the nearest enemy of that type and continue to seek them out once their initial target has been taken down. Granted, that last part can get a little bit wonky sometimes, so you will want to keep cycling through and reaffirming these orders, but the point stands. Repeat this process for every ship type, making a mental checklist to make sure you've got something fighting everything. Once you get to your capital ships, they can be assigned individual targets based on their weapons, and you can also choose to micromanage their items and abilities if you like to get the maximum value possible. But with a possible 5 capital ship types and a Titan with 4 abilities each and 4 items, 8 for the Titan, that's a lot of potential micro. So it's best to leave it on autocast and simply set the targets. They'll automatically use their abilities on whatever you set them on anyway, so it's all good. As for target prioritization, I did get a comment asking why they were losing a battle when they focused their fleet on the enemy capital ship, and it brought up a good point. Let's say you focus all your power onto that capital ship. That's going to take a real long time to go down, and will be dealing damage and using abilities the whole time. Alongside this, the rest of that enemy fleet will also be dealing damage the whole time. Now sure, once the capital ship dies, the fleet loses a lot of power all at once, but you'll still have the rest of it to deal with. If you instead spread your firepower and give some smaller ships a task of taking out their smaller ships, you'll bring down their fleet's power steadily over time, reducing its overall damage output even faster, even if it may not be all at once, like the capital ship focus. It may seem counterproductive to take out lesser threats first, but it makes it easier for the rest of your fleet to survive, and honestly, that's sometimes more important than winning the battle. If you lose your entire fleet, you'll lose time and resources that you'll need to spend replacing it, so keep it safe by setting your ships to fight battles that favour them, bringing down the enemy's power from all of their ships at once, and you'll be much better because of it. And honestly, that's all there is to micro. It's really not that complicated, and the hardest part is finding each of your own ship types and finding an enemy ship type for them to go after. As long as every ship is fighting something they're strong against and your fleet isn't too spread out, they should do fine. As I said, most capital ships have area abilities to benefit nearby ships, so keeping units close together is always a good idea. Whether you choose to bring siege ships or not, leave planetary focus until the end, as you don't really gain much benefit from destroying the planet, aside from any minor bonuses from planetary items. Take out everything in orbit and then go for the kill at the end. But that's everything I have for this fleet building and micromanagement guide for Sins of a Solar Empire 2. If you have any more questions, please leave them in the comments below and I'll do my best to help you out. Like, subscribe, and if you want more Sins of a Solar Empire 2 videos, then why not check out my Vasari faction guide.